What's up, guys? Dr. Joe Ruskowski here from IDPT, and today we're going to be talking about a very popular, very common concept, and that's anterior pelvic tilt. So what it is and how to fix it, let's get into it. So the reason why anterior pelvic tilt conversation is so popular is because actually every single human being has anterior pelvic tilt to some extent. And the reason that is because I've talked about this on previous videos, is that gravity is coming down at all times, and humans are the only species that are primarily bipedal, which means we're the only species that actually stand on 2 feet for most of our life. And when that happens and gravity is coming down, it is going to weigh on us and start to push us forward and basically bend us backwards. And when that happens, that pelvis is going to drop forward, and we're going to get really arching through our back, and then it's going to tighten up our hip flexors, those damn hip flexors. So now, as a concept on its own, anterior pelvic tilt is not harmful, it's not a bad thing. Having said that, when left unchecked and as it progresses, it can become an issue and can be a lead contributor to your symptoms, particularly back pain, front of the hip pain, even front knee pain, because of how it trickles down the body. So what I want to do is show you what that looks like and then teach you how to fix it, or start fixing it on your own at home, because there's a lot of information about anterior pelvic tilt out there, and it can make me puke, but most of them are going to say that you have tight hip flexors and you have a weak core. Guys, muscles don't work in isolation. That may become a result of the anterior pelvic tilt, but we're not here to address muscles. We're here to fix the underlying reason, and that is the position of the pelvis, and that's what we're going to do today. All right, so as that pelvis tips forward and continues to tip forward, what you can see is that the low back tightens up and arches a lot, and it actually over lengthens the stomach. So now that's when you get that like big belly look. You ever see someone who's like skinny fat, like they're not a fat person, but they have a belly? This explains why, because now if I take a breath in right here, where does that breath go? It goes right into my stomach. So that explains why when they say anterior pelvic tilt is caused by a weak core. No, anterior pelvic tilt causes a weak core because there's no amount of crunches or ab work that we can do to offset 22,000 breaths into my stomach a day. Unless you're going to do 22,000 crunches, then, by all means, be my guest. But again, so that pelvis goes forward, everything rocks forward, the back tightens up, the hip flexors, the front of our pockets, get tight, but then our hamstrings get long and they get weak. So if people tell you like you need to stretch your hamstrings more to really alleviate your back pain, tell them they're full of it, guys. They don't know what they're talking about, because if I stretch my hamstrings when it's already long and weak, we are making the issue worse, and we are not fixing the position of the pelvis, which we know is the underlying root cause of 90% of people's low back pain. Here's a test that you can do to see how significant your anterior pelvic tilt is. All right, guys, so here's a quick test that you can do to see how much anterior pelvic tilt you have. Now, again, this isn't something that is like a diagnosis or something to say that there's a problem, but it's just a good frame of reference. So all you're going to do is you're going to lay on your back, and you can do it 2 ways. So you can go knees bent, feet on the ground, and then you're going to try to slide your hand underneath your low back. Now, if you can slide your hand under really easily, then that's going to tell us that you likely have a large degree, too much anterior pelvic tilt, and it's something we should do something about. A little resistance is probably normal, and then nothing, you're crazy. You're just a freak of nature. Now, if we go legs totally straight, that'll be a little bit more of an exaggerated pelvic tilt position. So again, I'm going to try to slide my hand underneath. And if I can slide my whole hand, no problem. That's probably too much, and we need to do something about it. I could get my hand in, but then my wrist gets blocked. Probably pretty normal. Anything less than that, not much to talk about, okay? So all we want to know that information for is just as a frame of reference for as we continue to do the exercises I'm going to show you and continue to work on this, you'd like to see that improve a little bit. Again, this isn't going to be an end-all be-all. We're never going to totally fix anterior pelvic tilt because it's totally natural, but we do want to reduce the amount that we have, especially if we have things like low back pain, hip pain. So now we're actually going to get into the exact same position to start to fix this anterior pelvic tilt, guys. So what we're going to do, we're going to use positioning, and we're actually going to use breathing to start to improve this position, okay? The reason we're going to use breathing is for 2 reasons. One, it's going to align our rib cage and our pelvis. So if you look back on what anterior pelvic tilt looks like, you can see that alignment that we need between the rib cage and the pelvis is off. And when it's off, that pelvis is going to be unchecked and it's going to continue to get worse. So we need to get that back into alignment first. Following that, when we breathe into it, we're going to get an internal stretch, which is going to help hold that position there. So you're going to lay on your back with your knees bent. And then from there, you have some degree of anterior pelvic tilt. Well, I want you to reduce it. So I want you to roll your hip the opposite way. So posterior pelvic tilt, okay, and flatten your lower back to the ground a bit. Now, one thing I want to caution you against is really squeezing your abs hard or squeezing your glutes hard, because that's going to actually stiffen your pelvis, and we want that pelvis to be kind of free moving. So we're going to go ahead and get that posterior pelvic tilt. Okay, and then we're going to put one hand on our stomach and one hand on our chest. And we're going to take a deep breath in through our nose. And what we want to feel is that first, the hand on the stomach rises, but only a little bit. We want the hand on the chest to rise more. So it's going to go hand on the stomach rise, but then hand on the chest rise more. In through your nose. And then a full breath out through your mouth. And if we're pressing down through our feet a little bit, we'll actually feel our hamstrings tighten up a little bit. The reason why this position works so great is, number one, we're aligning the rib cage and the pelvis, which is what we need. But number two, if anterior pelvic tilt causes a long and weak hamstring, well, this position is the exact opposite. We're going to shorten our hamstrings, and then we're going to press our heels down a little bit and tighten them up. That's going to help get and keep our pelvis underneath our body. I want to repeat this for 10 breaths, and I want to do it 2 or 3 times a day. All right, guys, so if you remember, with anterior pelvic tilt, when the pelvis goes forward, we tighten up our hip flexors. Again, it is not the cause of the anterior pelvic tilt, but it becomes a symptom, and it's still something that we can and will address, okay? So we're gonna do a hip flexor stretch, but this hip flexor stretch variation is not only gonna take away that hip flexor tightness, but it's gonna aim to focus on the alignment of the rib cage and the pelvis to get to that underlying root cause reason, okay? So we're gonna put one knee down and put the other foot forward. Now, the number one most common mistake that I see with hip flexor stretches every time that I walk into the gym is that most people really push forward, they arch their back, and they get a huge stretch here, and I can't blame them because the stretch feels good. But again, if we're trying to get rid of anterior pelvic tilt, why would we put ourselves into more anterior pelvic tilt and squeeze our butt and really shove our whole pelvis forward? We don't want that, all right? So the way that we like to do it, one knee under our base of support, one foot forward. From here, just like we did on the ground, we're gonna roll our hip underneath us a little bit to get that pelvis back, okay? Not squeezing our abs. From here, we're gonna put our hands into a supporting structure, so like a wall, and then we're gonna slightly push our chest away from the wall so that our head, our shoulder, our hip, and our knee are all in one nice line. Okay, I get that great stretch down the front of the thigh, and then I'm gonna work on my breathing a little bit to hold the ribs and the pelvis here. I like to do this 3 times each leg for 30 seconds each side. All right, so if you remember when you have that anterior pelvic tilt, how it pushes your stomach out and really weakens your core, well, then it would make sense that we want to strengthen that core, but we want to do it with a good relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis. So what we're going to do is something called a beast hold, which is going to realign our pelvis and our rib cage, but then also work to strengthen our core in the meantime. All right, so I'm going to drop down to the ground here, and if you have a wall at home, I'm using a box. But we're going to use that wall because it's going to give us a little bit of that tightened hamstring that we talked about that we want to get that pelvis back underneath us. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on my hands and knees here, keeping my hands directly under my shoulders. Now, if you watch my pelvis, I'm going to get a tuck of that pelvis and roll those hips back underneath me. And then I'm going to lift my knees up off the ground and push my heels into the wall behind me. Okay, so by lifting up, I'm getting that core activation. With the pelvis tuck, I'm getting that anterior pelvic tilt to go away. And when I push my heels into the wall, it's actually gonna tighten up my hamstrings to hold my pelvis there. So what I'd recommend is holding it really as long as you can. And once you start feeling yourself dropping down or pinching your shoulder blades, too long, drop down and reset. So again, we're gonna tuck, lift up here, you're gonna hold and get those breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. For me, I like to go about 45 seconds, 3 to 4 times. All right, guys, so to wrap up, now we know what anterior pelvic tilt is and we're not scared of it anymore. We know that it's a completely normal thing and every single human being has it to some extent. Having said that, that doesn't mean that we just allow it to progress and to get worse unchecked. And so we know that the anterior pelvic tilt causes a weak core, it causes weak hamstrings, and it causes tight hip flexors and a tight lower back muscle. But those muscles are not the reason why the anterior pelvic tilt happens in the first place. It's the secondary consequence. So how do we fix it? We use breathing techniques and we align the rib cage and the pelvis again to reduce the space beneath the ground and your back. And then we're gonna strengthen the core in the right position, and we're gonna strengthen the hamstrings in the right position, and we're gonna stretch out those hip flexors without contributing further to the anterior pelvic tilt. Guys, if you found this helpful, you found this valuable, please like, share, subscribe, and if you have any questions, drop them below and I will get to them as soon as I see them. Thanks, guys. See you at the next episode.